Let's start the Q&A with kind of thoughts on collaboration, because even though you didn't collaborate on any of the pieces in the exhibition per se, the two of you, but collaboration keeps reappearing in really interesting ways. You collaborate with different artists, musicians, performers, writers, and how do these collaborations feed into your work? How does it influence your work and the processes?
Yeah, do you want to start? Or?
I don't mind. A lot of my work is collaborative, and it started out collaborating with musicians because I played the saxophone and I used to perform saxophone from when I was a teenager. And so from way back then I was thinking about how to connect my musical practice with my visual art practice. And what I liked about music was that it was more collaborative, and I think that just my personality is geared towards having a collaborative, just working with other people as well as those times in my studio when I'm working alone. So I worked with a musician for this opening performance performance painting that I did. I worked with a dancer for the video piece, which is in the window, and then with Sophie, we didn't actually collaborate on a specific piece, but we collaborated quite a bit putting together this exhibition. And I've actually struggled to collaborate with poets and writers, but I've worked with poets in the past. But language is such a spoken language, and words have such a different way of working than visual mark making. And but I think that in collaborating with Sophie, I mean we're interested in very similar things. And what I think realised through doing this exhibition is having someone who's a poet and who really understands language. It's given me kind of like language for my visual work, which has really offered me like sort of more consciousness around it, which has been really, really useful, I think. Yeah.
The way I really think about collaboration is that voices of the past or texts can also become our collaborators. And I've done this in a lot of different projects. I did a big project called My Little Enlightenment Plays, where I had conversations with, sometimes friendly conversations, sometimes a bit more kind of adversarial conversations with Enlightenment thinkers and writers and scientists. And obviously I couldn't have real conversations with them, but I could have conversations with what they're writing. And work something out through reading through them, writing through them. And I think there's an interesting power balance in that collaboration, and I obviously have less of a responsibility towards maybe these very old texts than I would towards a collaborator with whom I'm actually working in a performance, where I wouldn't want to have maybe that kind of hierarchy or dissonance or deliberate kind of pushback. But I think it's interesting to think of collaboration in this expansive sense and bringing in different voices into your practice to undo the idea that we ever really make work on our own. Like even when we don't collaborate on a specific work, that work is never just your making. It's always the result of conversations with people, learning from other people, reading people, looking at other people's work, listening to things. And sometimes that's historical and sometimes that's contemporary.
Yeah, it's also kind of how you basically collaborated in that sense. So all the pieces that you have in the exhibition were kind of inspired by one another's work, reading, text, paintings,
Yeah,
as
and
well.
thinking about, I think, the concept of translation and how we both work through the notion of translation, either translating from sound into painting or drawing, translating between languages, in my case, but also translating text into performance, text into costume or video. And I think that's a kind of crux, I think, of the exhibition.
Yeah, and also I think intimacy and active listening is something really important in both of your works. And you are not just active listeners of your collaborators, but also the materials that you use and work with. So whether it's the rocks in a canyon, whether it's the paint, surfaces, music, text, various objects. And I feel that this intimacy and active listening is what captures a whole load of range of emotions in the work. In the paintings, films, text, sound. And can you tell us a bit more about intimacy and the importance of intimacy with these things in your work or methods?
Sure. I mean, I have two pieces in this show, and one, I think, thinks through intimacy with materials. That's the video piece in the back, and how maybe something might end up being actually quite sensorial or even erotic without the text maybe even talking about that. And then this piece is very intimate in terms of the process in which it was made, because it wasn't made as a work of art. We took those photographs, Laura took those photographs of me the day before we got married in Texas in 2020, which was also the day before the pandemic was declared, basically, or 2 days before the pandemic was declared. And so I had to ask for permission to make a work out of this, or felt like I had to ask for permission, because, when you make something that is very personal, you kind of, obviously it involves other people. And so has these different layers that I also tried to capture in the materials I then engaged with. The photographs really capture this dance with the rock and touching the rock as a kind of proxy for the other person. And also maybe to encapsulate that there's always this unknowability about another person. And then also I think to attempt to capture, but also really fail to capture the intimacy or momentousness of the experience. I think that's really what I would say about intimacy and trying to find either a material match, but also then a match in language, but also realizing that it's just this approximation, and it only works through layers or opacities, and to kind of get to that somehow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think with my work, there's I think intimacy comes into the actual process when I'm working with either a musician or a dancer or an actor, because the work tends to usually be improvised, and so there's a kind of listening to each other in the moment, and listening and responding. And my intention is to respond before thinking, and I use an acting technique called the Meisner technique, which is it's about responding very kind of spontaneously and truthfully before. So kind of it's a way of getting out of your head and not being self-conscious, and so. I think that there's an intimacy there when I'm improvising. And also, I suppose, doing a performance painting, it's kind of like there's a sense of intimacy with the audience, actually kind of like seeing the process of creation, which is usually done behind closed doors. So there's that sort of like, it's quite sort of, it does feel quite sort of intimate in the sense that like, being watched while you're kind of making something, especially when it's sort of, you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. And then I think also there's a sort of intimacy with the materials, especially because my work is very physical, and I usually get paint all over my body. So that over time has kind of really led me to think about like toxicity of materials and what they do to our physical relationship with them. And also the kind of intimacy with like how to use the materials, because they all do different things. Different paints do different things, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Also, what is really quite visible, I think, in the works is these layering, and that you playfully give away certain sense of history in the works. For example, in the paintings, you can see the layering, and something has been smudged away. You left a couple of historical moments visible still in the paintings. But another important element that filters through the works in the exhibition is translation between these historical elements, and how translation between different acts, experiences, between different materials, objects and text also blurs and obstructs the edges between these translations. So how conscious or deliberate for you the building of these layers and dimensions, and the play between opacity and transparency in the works?
I think I already obviously touched on that a little bit, but maybe I can just expand on it. I think I'm always really interested in thinking about how something is made. I mean, whether that's a poem or an artwork or just a material, an object. I mean, this is sort of what I ask, like, how did you become this way? You know, how did hands touch you and make you in a certain way? And did you have to travel to get here? And then if that's the case, you've probably traversed some national boundaries, borders, all of these other things that suddenly come into it, and then you realize that this material or this object is just not a pure thing, but is shaped by all these things and people and histories it's come into contact with. And I think I'm really interested in making work that makes that apparent, or at least acknowledges that. And I think layering is a technique for doing that, I think. I mean, sort of linguistic layering, like having different, I guess, narrative layers, and then also, I think, material layers. But also, I think, just to touch on, or just kind of connect what you said also about intimacy and what Claire said about the material, I think we often hear, at least in the kind of poetic world or maybe theoretical world, we often hear about language as being material, but actually what would that really mean, to really think that through and make that that tactility, or that, I mean, how would we make that a reality so that people can actually experience that language is a material, and that sometimes it doesn't obey you like this, like it just sometimes, it just resists you, or it just doesn't work the way you want it to work. And to be really receptive to that, and to let the language be kind of submerged or rattled or percolated by that.
Well, my use of layers, when I think of layers, it's kind of like very physical. Like I mean, there are conceptual layers and there's narratives in my work, but mostly I think about, the layers are quite sort of straightforward. So I will kind of, because I work in a performative way, responding to either sound or language or movement, and I usually start with one layer, and I'll just do one layer in one sitting, and it will usually be quite improvised or something quite systematic, and I will be intending to be in this kind of state of flow, and so I won't be judging the work as I'm making it, and so I suppose I'm kind of looking for resolution, but I'm not going to kind of recognize resolution because I'm working in a kind of flow state. And so I usually will leave that one layer alone and, you know, put it to one side and then come back at a time when I'm going to be editing the work and more of a kind of a time when I'm going to be perhaps even writing about it, analysing it, and kind of using a different way of thinking. And then if I feel that the work is resolved, then that will be it. So it could just be one layer, and that's kind of great if it works the first time. But at the same time, I think it's really important when it doesn't work and it's not resolved, and then I work on it again, and then it's a kind of there's this process of struggle or like trying to being being resourceful, being inventive, and trying to find the way towards resolution, and then as layers build up, then the work becomes a lot more complex and sometimes more interesting as well.
Yeah, one example is, for example, the Cloud of Metals.
Yeah,
it's been in the making for how many years?
Yeah, I made that piece I did the first layer 13 years ago, and
is the large work at the back?
Yeah, and then the most recent layer was a few weeks ago. So, but I haven't been working on it the whole time. I put it away. I put it away for actually for years, and then I took it out again, and I thought, what does it need next? Actually I did the graphite. It's got a layer of graphite, and that was I started working with graphite fairly recently, and then I think it was when we were putting the show together, we focused quite a lot on sort of accidental marks and falling of marks. So yeah, there's got that. Yeah, there's another layer of that, and I think it's resolved now. Finally. Sometimes I know when it's resolved, and then there are other times where I'm not totally sure. And I think it is quite a physical feeling, but I think with music, you know when a piece resolves because it's very physical. But with visual art, it's not as physical. So, yeah.
Maybe one more question for you, Sophie, about how you bring in politics actually into these layers. Really subtle, very soft, but it's there in many situations.
Yeah. I think it's just I just have this I can't really say anything kind of very straightforwardly. I mean, I feel like it's both like a choice and also just habit. I don't know, and so I think it's maybe just the way I actually think that. I think the work is deeply political. I mean, both pieces are deeply political, but not in maybe an expected way or in a sort of straightforward way. It's not, here's the message, or now I'm going to talk about identity, or being queer, or now I'm going to talk about borders in this explicit way. I feel like lecture performances maybe more so, they kind of touch on the explicit more so than poems or videos or performances, and I am really interested in lecture performances for that reason, because I feel like they allow me to do that, to sort of dip my toe in without feeling like I'm doing too much of one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this comes out of a concern for the audience, for not wanting to speak for the audience and manipulate them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why the way I think about politics, or as like a politics of form, that I hope the politics emerge through the way I use form.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's time to open up the floor for questions.
Couple of questions,
the
yeah.
audience. If
And
you
then I'll have a drink. No questions?
Just shy smiles.
Yeah, Philippe.
You guys were saying about the difference between being collaborative and intimacy, but do you think both of them, they relate to each other in a way that you need, because you're intimate to the audience, to another, for example, to Sophie. This piece is very intimate personally, but you have your partner to collaborate in it.
Yes.
If that didn't happen, that experience didn't happen, that type of intimacy wouldn't happen as well. So my question is, do you think their intimacy is so collaborative, you need that collaboration or intimate to a person to be collaborative and vice versa? So that happen?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there may be different types of intimacy. I think that's one type of intimacy. The other intimacies, I think you can actually experience that with people you don't know very well, or I mean with an audience, for example, and I think you can also collaborate with an audience, and or at least you can gesture to it. I mean, I've given you a little gift. I mean, not all of you, but you can pick another, a little rock and decide what you want to do with it, and choose wisely. Or obviously you can put it in a protective layer of paper. Yesterday we did a reading with Adam, Aaron, and Florence, where we also did a little ritual. I think there are moments where you can actually create this intimacy with an audience and collaborate with an audience. But I think it's interesting. I think you can create that, but I think maybe it's a different kind of negotiation. How you would collaborate depending on how well you know each other. But also collaboration throws up these things. You think you maybe, I don't know a collaborator in a certain way, and then collaboration brings these different openings or angles, perceptions. Thank you, Khalid.
I really like film, and I've got a question about it. When you wrote it, you got lots of quotes from poets and people you work with, like you were just talking about. And but for a lot of people, it would be inaccessible. I mean, I found myself listening to it, and I watched it twice, and it was kind of like a poem, But did you ever consider kind of trying to tone down the language, or?
I think I'm going to tone it up for next time.
I would have thought that. I would have, oh my god, I can't.
It's okay, I think it's, for me, this is a way of actually just like being very, for me, this is a way of being very generous. I know that it can feel maybe like it's inaccessible at first because you're not familiar with all of the quotations, but I don't expect everyone to be familiar. I see it as an introduction to some ideas, also to my way of working. And also, as I said at the beginning of this lecture performance, that I would like people to feel like they can be lost in this garden of language that I'm creating, but simultaneously feel held. Like they're supposed to feel, they know that they can be a little lost, but they're not completely lost because there's still a framework. There are parameters for what's going on. Like that I know what I'm doing and you can trust me. And I think that this is where the materiality of language comes in, and sound and rhythm. I hope that the playfulness of the language, the use of the kind of tactility of language might carry you along, even if you don't rationally grasp everything that's going on. That on some kind of other level, you maybe get different feelings out of that material. And then you could obviously go back and watch it again. But I think this is also actually the experience we have often in life. I think, that we have to go back, or like we have to ask again, what does that mean? We have to look something up, And this is what I said earlier, that I don't want to sort of just present something on a plate to people that is like readily digestible. And I think that's a kind of, again, politics, and there's a long history, in writing and art for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's kind of impressionistic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You have to accept you're not going to understand it.
Yes.
And that's not the point.
No, I think the point is to take you on a journey and allow you to make your own discoveries.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
the journey of the lecture performance felt like that as well? Because it begins with this really vast, unknowable, is that, what's it called, Big Bend?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then ends with this little piece
Yes.
of rock that you can take with you,
Mm-hmm.
also in a kind of digestible form, or something like
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think some of you, worked with me before, like Aaron, for example. I like to do that because I know that maybe I'm asking a lot of people, if you have to listen to me and if it's quite complex, but at least there's something tangible. Maybe that's something you can hold on to and connect with. And then maybe it can contain some of the memories or the imprints of what's been going on around that.
Yeah, I felt myself really longing to feel the weight of the rock as you were passing them around, and then feeling the absence of the weight when other people were holding it, that I wasn't.
Nice. I think that's...
When you were talking, both of you were talking about collaboration, it also seemed that collaboration became a very open concept. And I always feel that collaboration should at least have a sense of mutuality, or it becomes response, right? Which is something else. So my question to both of you is actually whether collaboration or response leads to a different form of, and I like your term resolving the piece very much, leads to a different way that a piece or a work gets resolved. And if you can say something about that.
With my work, when I'm working with a musician, for example, I think control is a big theme in my work, because when I'm working with another person, sometimes the other person is in control and sometimes I'm in control, and then who gets to say when it's finished as well. So sometimes I like to, I've had a proxy painter in the past as well, so we've kind of worked out what the parameters, and then I've actually played music, so kind of swapping roles, and that kind of it kind of opens up the possibilities.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think you're right that that would change the work. To whether it's collaborative or a response. But I think collaborative, and also what would true collaboration really be? Is it possible to have participation in equal measure? I think that's again also quite a big political question. To have participation and collaboration on that level. Yeah. And again, I can't be one person saying this is what it is, right? Because then that would undo the notion of that. Yeah. I guess has to be explored in an ongoing fashion and negotiated. Yeah.
And we actually also talked about during studio visit, and when we were talking about the works, this perfection and imperfection, and also kind of the resolving when the work stops. But it's often not, because even though in certain cases in the moment maybe it feels resolved, but sometimes it keeps coming back to you, right? So there are, in different publication, your amazing outfit at the moment, it's kind of shape-shifting and coming back in different ways.
Yeah, and I think because we somehow think, and I think this is again, it has something to do with this originality myth, and that we think, okay, this has happened, or and maybe also especially sort of having connections to an academic mindset where we think, okay, it's published, then you either quote it, but you can't plagiarize, possibly. But I'm really interested in sort of self-plagiarizing or self-citation, because why should my thinking stop here? I want my thinking to keep being open and malleable. Why should one line, if I've used the line before, but now I feel like it means something else, or it can go in a different direction, why should I not be able to do that? And it's not my language anyway, that's the other thing. It's who really owns language?
Yeah. And then also how then it can turn into completely different shapes.
Yes.
Any more questions?
When it comes to writing for performance or just writing to an audience in general, it often feels like the performance itself is kind of a transaction between the performer / writer and the audience. So how do you choose when you're writing how much you want to tell the audience and how much you want to just leave them space to think on their own? Like when it comes to, say, a message or what it is you're trying to imprint on them, if you're trying to imprint anything.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to? I think, I mean, as I said, I mean, I don't really, for example, with this work, I don't really go into the details of, or the background. I wouldn't put that in the work. I mean, I'm not hiding it. You know, I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't want to suggest too much of a reading in the making of the work. I think there's sort of, I may be leaving some crumbs for people to pick up. But I don't think I ever have a message. Yeah. Sorry.
That was good.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does,
Yeah. Sorry, one last thing I'm going to say. Sorry, because this is like, I mean, this is basically, I mean, I always talk about this, but I think this is sort of my utopian belief or utopian nugget, that I really hope that this is a way of like giving something to an audience or like some power to the audience, you know, given that there's already this kind of power imbalance. You know? Right, maybe it's time for
Okay. So maybe then just the last question is that if you are planning anything at the moment, what's next after the exhibition? Today is the last day of this show, so I was just wondering if anything is on the way or...
I'm doing a performance next Saturday at Canning Gallery. It's a big group show of artists who work with performance drawing and painting. And I mean, throughout this exhibition, I've been continuing to work on paintings. So I have like a body of paintings that I'm working on.
I am part of a group called the Hildegard von Bingen Society for Gardening Companions, which has discovered a queer and feminist society founded by Hildegard von Bingen, and we are reviving it. And some people here are also involved. And so now it is back, and we are doing some events, and there will be a publication. And so if you want, talk to me if you want to join, if you're interested in gardening or botany. We'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. If you missed any of the performances or other events, everything is documented to a certain level and will be uploaded on the HOXTON 253 website, so feel free to check it out. And thank you so much for joining today. And please stay for a beer and have a chat with the artist and enjoy the last half an hour of the exhibition.